Awesome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the League of Women Voters North Andover candidating event. You're all part of a grand experiment here to try a different format that we haven't used before, where you'll actually get to engage directly with the candidates, which is wonderful. So welcome here to the Stevens Estate. The League is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government, works to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and influences public policy through education and advocacy. You can find out more about what the League is up to at our state website, lwvma.org, or on our League of Women Voters of Andover, North Andover Facebook page. If you're interested in getting involved locally, you can email us as well, league@lwv-andovers.org. There are also some forms on your tables if you're interested, along with other information about voting and the League, ballot questions, so feel free to take any of that information with you. As I said, tonight's format is new, candidating, speed dating, election style. So each candidate for state office who would represent North Andover at the State House was invited. We understand that each of you will not be voting for each candidate who is here, as North Andover has 8 precincts, and the candidates represent different precincts in town. However, we do believe that those who are elected will represent our town as a whole, and we would like you to have the opportunity to get to know them all. Each candidate will give a 2-minute opening statement. Then the candidates will disperse to tables at which voters here in our live audience are seated, for those of you at home who might not be able to see. The voters will have 10 minutes each to ask questions of the candidates, which you will come up with on your own. So feel free to ask whatever you'd like. After 10 minutes, a bell would ring, which you heard a little bit earlier, and the candidates will then wrap up their statements and move to the next table. There are League members at each table that kind of help direct you, but you're basically going in numerical order. Let's see. So we ask for you, the voters here in attendance, to really try to stick to asking questions as opposed to providing commentary. So the goal is to get as many questions asked at the table as possible. And in that spirit, we also ask the candidates to try to answer the questions thoroughly, but also concisely, so that you can cover as many topics cover more topics at your table. If you are watching at home, you will see opening statements as well as the discussion at one of the tables, which each candidate will visit. Seated at each table is a League member. The League members are there only to welcome the candidates and facilitate discussion on an as-needed basis, and then to help guide the candidates in the right direction from table to table. As stated earlier, the League as an organization is nonpartisan. As are myself and Emily Granoff as the voter service chairpersons and local presidents. By nonpartisan, we mean that the League does not, will not, and has not endorsed or opposed candidates. Not all League members, though, are required to be nonpartisan. Often League members are very active in their communities, and thus these days, as you can imagine, it's kind of hard finding this many volunteers who might not be involved in someone's campaign in some way, shape, or form. So if a League facilitator at a table has done any work for one of these candidates' campaigns, they will disclose that information when that candidate and the opponent come to the table. As a community, we adhere to our RAISE values of respect, achievement, inclusion, service, and empathy. So we ask that everyone involved in this event show their respect by following the League rules, which prohibit any personal attacks on a candidate and questions of a personal nature about a candidate or his or her family. Also, as those in attendance were told when they entered, no campaign paraphernalia is allowed in the event. So if you are wearing a pin or any kind of campaign information, if you would please remove that. And only the media covering this event may record or take pictures. So I have seen some phones and things out, so just be aware that only the media, whether it's North Andover Cam, the Eagle Tribune, the Citizen, only they can take pictures or record parts of the event. That being said, thank you all for being here. This is a great turnout. We are excited about the discussions that are going to take place, and we will now begin with our Pledge of Allegiance. If you can rise as you are willing and able. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn the evening over to Emily Granoff, our co-president.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Emily Granoff, and I am the other co-president of our league. I am a resident of Andover and cannot vote for most of these lovely candidates. I am also the other voter service chairperson, and as Heather said, I am completely nonpartisan. I would like to also welcome the audience and everyone here tonight. Before we, wait, that's. So yes, the upcoming election will take place November 6th, and everyone in North Andover can vote at North Andover High School. Voters in North Andover will be choosing 2 state representatives and 2 state senators. Which candidates you'll be voting for depends on which precinct you live in. And those here tonight were given sample ballots when you came in. If you need a ballot, please see a league member. We will begin with 2-minute opening statements. Candidates, your timekeepers are right over here. When there is 1 minute remaining in your statement, they will hold up a 1-minute sign. When there is 30 seconds remaining in your statement, they will hold up a 30-second sign. And when there is 15 seconds remaining, they will hold up a 15-second sign. When your time is over, you will see a stop card. If you have a little bit left in your statement, feel free to just end your sentence gracefully. But if you keep going significantly afterwards, I will say thank you and move on. We will hear first from the candidates running for the 2 state representative seats representing North Andover. Candidates will give their opening remarks in alphabetical order by seat. Representing precincts 1 through 5, we have candidates Ryan Losco and Christina Minicucci. Ryan?
Well, thank you, and good evening, everybody. It's great to be here tonight. Before I begin, I just want to thank the league for hosting this event, as well as North Andover CAM for broadcasting, and all of you for attending. For those of you who don't know who I am, I'm 24 years old. I was raised in the town of North Andover. I'm a graduate of our public school system and have been active in the community. I'm also pursued public higher education at Westfield State University, where I was fortunate enough to be active there and serve as class president for 3 out of 4 years while I was there. Professionally, I've spent the last couple years working as a victim advocate in the district attorney's office, focusing on cases of domestic violence as well as elder abuse. Before that, I spent some time interning with them. The reason why I'm running to be your next state representative is I believe that we need some new young leadership on Beacon Hill. I think that we need people to go to Beacon Hill to continue the reforms that have been going on in the past couple years. And as well as I believe that we really, at this time in our community, we need an advocate to really go up there and fight for the people. As a former advocate, I know what that takes. I know it takes a lot of hard work. I know what the duties and responsibilities are, and if get afforded the opportunity, I'll go to bat for you every single day on Beacon Hill. With that, I look forward to meeting all of you, engaging in some good discussions here tonight. Thank you in advance for your participation here, and thank you again to the league for having me. Thanks.
Thank you, Ryan. And if I could ask the audience to hold your applause until after everyone is done, it'll just help us streamline the process. Christina?
Hi, I'm Christina Minicucci. I'm running for state representative. I do not feel very comfortable getting in front of people and talking about myself. This is something that does not come naturally to me. I always say what does come naturally to me is rolling up my sleeves, working hard, and making a difference in the community. And that's exactly what I've been doing. I am a former board member of the YWCA of Greater Lawrence. I was a sexual assault hotline advocate for many years, as well as a peer educator. And most recently, I served on the master plan committee here in North Andover, as well as the school building committee. When I see a gap, I fill it, because that's what it takes to make a difference. I decided to run for state representative because I believe the Merrimack Valley needs a strong voice at the State House, whether it's at the doors, on the phone, sitting around a table, having coffee with voters. What I understand is that people really just want good jobs, quality public education, a safe place to call home. These are the basics. These are the tools people need to be successful. I also see that people worry about big things that impact our community, like the opioid crisis and transportation, healthcare, public safety. I understand these needs because they're the same needs I want for myself and my family, and I understand these worries because they're the same things that keep me up at night. And I think we need more than somebody who just understands the needs of this community. It needs to be somebody who's willing to take all these stories to the State House and advocate for the members of this community. I love the Merrimack Valley. I know I can do this job and do it well, and I'm going to fight to make sure that we stay in the spotlight, that we get our piece of the pie, and that we stay relevant across the state. So I'm really looking forward to meeting all of you and hearing your stories, and I really hope to earn your vote on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I also appreciate your applause, but let's still try and reserve that for the end. Mr. Lyons, if you would like to make an opening statement.
Sure. My name is Jim Lyons, and I'm the state representative for the 18th Essex. And I want to talk to you about the opiate epidemic. It's so personal to so many of us in this room, and it's very, very personal to me and my family. Yesterday afternoon, I was out knocking on doors, and I got a call from my son, Tyler. You see, Tyler has been struggling with an addiction for 6 years. And right now, he's in a treatment facility. And the reason he called me was because he said, "Dad, I heard that there are people up in the Andover area who say that you want to criminalize the user." And I said, "Where did you hear that?" He said, "Mikey called me." And I said, "Let me check it in the newspaper." So sure enough, in the newspaper yesterday, my opponent said, "We cannot criminalize our way out of this, as my opponent has been trying to do." My son Tyler has been dealing with this epidemic and this disease for 6 years. He said, "Dad, you got to tell our story." So I'm going to tell our story. Make sure that everyone knows about the budget amendment that you filed in 2015. And you went to Brian Dempsey, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, and Brian said, "Jim, we can't afford to spend the money." I said, "We can't afford not to." Tell them about how you and I and Dempsey went over to the Cushing House in South Boston. You remember, Dad, the Gavin Foundation, where I was in treatment and got thrown out. Tell everyone about how in the spring of 2015, after the visit, Brian Dempsey added millions of dollars for recovery homes. Tell them about how the governor then changed the regulation to increase the rate from $75 to $125. Tell him about the fact that you're on the board of directors of 2 sober homes. Tell him about the fact that you brought the governor out.
Thank you,
to
Mr.
this-
Lyons.
How you brought the governor out to a sober house, and in front of 18 addicts, they explained to you in no uncertain terms to criminalize the user is exactly the wrong thing to do. And Dad, give him one final message from me. Tell him not to lie about your positions.
I apologize for not introducing the race before Mr. Lyons. Trom and Jim are running for state representative in precincts 6 through 8 in North Andover, as well as a few precincts in Andover. Ms. Nguyen, if you would like to make an opening statement.
Definitely. Thank you so much to the League for hosting the event today, and thank you so much for everyone for being here. My name is Trom Nguyen, and I'm running for state representative to represent the people. Some of you have not yet known me, and I intend to change that, so I want to give a little bit of a background about me. My family came to this country as political refugees when I was 5 years old, and I was raised right here in the Merrimack Valley, right in Lawrence and Methuen. But this campaign is not about my story. It's about our story and how I want to work with you to make this community a welcoming place for everyone to work, live, and raise a family. I understand the struggles of working families and what it takes for every person to have a fair shot at success. And I value the public school education that allowed me to be the first person in my family to go to college and the first person to go to law school to then graduate from law school and serve my community as a legal aid attorney. I think that these opportunities need to be available for every single person. As a woman in my 30s, I have spent my entire career being in the front lines, helping seniors, veterans, people with disabilities, survivors of domestic violence, and children in the courtroom. And I also have a track record of advocating for legislation that improves the quality of life of everyone in the Commonwealth. Many of the bills that I've worked on have been signed into law because of my work as a collaborator and a coalition builder, as someone who can work across the aisle to actually move things forward. And one of the reasons why I decided to run for office is that I've tried to work with my legislator for years now to get in touch with him to talk about these important bills, the things that I care about and things that the people in my community care about. And I think that a legislator needs to be available and accessible to the people to understand their issues, to actually work with them to get things done. I will also work, as a state representative, I plan to work collaboratively to make sure that we address important issues like reproductive health, common sense gun safety, and of course, we all want to address opioid addiction, and we want to do it address it as a public health policy. So I definitely look forward to working with you and to having further conversations with you, and I hope to have an opportunity to work with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. Now we will hear from our candidates for State Senate. Running for the 1st Essex State Senate seat, representing precincts 1 through 4, we have Diana DiZoglio and Alexander Layton Williams. Ms. DiZoglio?
Thank you. I first and foremost just want to begin my statement by giving a huge shout out to the League of Women Voters and all of the volunteers and advocates and all of the community members who took time out of their busy schedules with their children, their family obligations, and their work obligations to be here on a Wednesday night. I know that can't be easy, but you're here because you care. And I just want to thank you for taking that time to come out and to support whatever candidate you came out to support and to give us this opportunity to speak directly to you. I'm very appreciative of that. My name's Diana DiZoglio. I've been a state representative for the last 6 years, serving the communities of North Andover, Haverhill, Lawrence, and Methuen. And during that time, we as a community have had the opportunity to make tremendous progress on issues that have already been mentioned here. We've made tremendous progress on the opioid epidemic, reining in prescription opioids to young children, making sure that we have a prescription monitoring program in place. We have made tremendous progress when it comes to our veterans, making sure that we're helping combat homelessness amongst veterans, making sure that we are appropriating funds for jobs training and education fund for our veterans returning home, and making sure that we do simple things that we might forget about, like make sure that excise taxes aren't being paid by our men and women in service who are serving abroad. We've increased funding for our local senior centers, making sure that our seniors have the opportunity to not just survive in our communities, but so that they have the opportunity to thrive in our communities. We've increased funding for transportation in all of the communities that I've represented by working together, by making sure that we bring these issues to the forefront in the state legislature. It's because of this progress and it's because of working together with all of you that we've been able to see these things happen across the region. And I want to take that work to the next level in the state Senate, because as a state senator, we will have a greater platform and a stronger voice to be able to make these positive impacts on our community that we all can agree on. So I just want to say once again, thank you so much for coming. I see my time here. I will stop on time. Thanks so much for coming, and I look forward to the one-on-one conversations at the table.
Thank you. Oh, we're holding our applause.
Hold the applause for. Thank you for that.
Sorry. Mr. Williams?
Hello, I'm Alexander Layton Williams, but you can just call me Alex. I really don't like talking in public, and if I'm honest, I'm dreading meeting every single one of you. But I've been given a unique opportunity to run within the district, and I'm very happy to do it, despite the fear. I've served on Boxford's Board of Assessors for, well, I don't serve anymore, but I served for almost 3 years, starting when I was 18 years old, and I gave it up when I moved to Amesbury officially. I've lived basically half my time within the district for the last 7 years, and in that time I've come to love it and know it very well. The main goals of my campaign are primarily civic reform, but that doesn't mean I haven't thought about you on an individual level. I care deeply about my community and about each and every one of you. If you could feel how badly I was shaking, you would know how true that was. I don't want you to look at me, or even Ryan now that I know he's only 24. That's ridiculous. I'm 21.
Me too.
Yeah. It's a real barrel of laughs at this end of the table. I love it. I don't want you to look at me and think I'm making a joke out of it or that I don't care. I'm running now, and I'm running early because I do care, and because I want to help, and because I know I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Bruce E. Tarr is running for the 1st Essex and Middlesex Senate seat, which represents North Andover precincts 5 through 8, but he was unable to make it here because of a conflict, and he is running unopposed. Thank you to all of our candidates for coming and also for giving us their opening statements. It is now time for candidating. If we all work together in 70 minutes or less, you will all be able to ask these candidates your own questions. And audience members, if you would now like to make your way to the tables you are assigned to, table 5 is in the Oak Room and table 6 is in the library. Candidates, I ask that you take your signs with you.
Hello, my name is Joyce Bradshaw. I'm the town clerk and chief election official for the town of North Andover with an update regarding the November 6, 2018 state election. There's lots of differences that have come about with this election. We will be offering early voting as we did in 2016. That will start October 22nd and go to November 2nd. We at least will be doing normal business hours for early voting. You need no reason at all to vote early. You can come to the town hall and obtain your ballot and cast it, and you'll be all set for the November election. Those ballots are automatically counted for the November election. We also have absentee ballots, which are a little different than early voting ballots, that you need not to be able to get to the polls on election day, have a physical disability, or a religious reason why you can't get to the polls on election day. Those ballots are going to be made available sometime this week around the 3rd of October in Town Hall. You can actually come and vote in person during our normal business hours for absentee ballots, or you can have a request that we will mail you the ballot, and all you have to do is make sure that it's returned by mail or in person to us by election day at 8 p.m. So be looking for notices regarding early voting. These ballots are done by, we have 3 different ballots this time, one for each, one for precincts 1 to 4. Precinct 5 has its own ballot. Precinct 6 to 8 has its own ballot. So there's 3 different ballots for this. All parties and all offices are on these ballots. So it's not like the primary that you had to pick a particular ballot. So those will be coming available to us at Town Hall in the next few days. We also will be posting the specimen ballots on our website, so you can go and you can check and make sure that of which ballot you will have to choose from. Also, you can go to our website and it takes you to the Secretary of State's link, which will show you whether you're registered to vote. It's important if you normally haven't voted or you had an issue of changing your address or status, just to double check to make sure you're registered to vote. The deadline to register to vote is Wednesday, October 17th, and we're open till 8 p.m. But if you're not sure, you can always just pick up the phone and call us at our office at 978-688-9501. And if you have any questions at all regarding voting or applying for absentee ballots or overseas ballots, just give us a call and we're glad to help at any time. And thank you so much for your participation. Your vote's very important to us, and we look forward to seeing you on November 6th. Thank you.
So this is Diana DiZoglio. She's running for state senate in the 1st Essex District. Does anyone have a question for her?
Yes, I sure do. Diana, I've known you for quite some time, and I've always known you as a very energetic person. Though I'm from North Andover, and of course my priority is helping North Andover, you represent a very broad spectrum of communities. So tell us a little bit about how you connect with the various communities.
So thank you, Tom. Great question. My cell phone is on my website. My cell phone is on my Facebook page. I have a newsletter that goes out to all of the constituents in every community that I represent, and that helps to educate people on the issues that we've been working on in the state legislature. But more than anything, I'm boots on the ground. I'm in the communities every day. I know most of you personally here, and we have the opportunities to have the conversations at the donut shop, at the, local restaurants or what have you, or even just walking around, standing outside of the post office or at the town hall here in North Andover. That's something that I want to bring to the next level in the communities that I hope to represent as a state senator. I think that this community, the communities that I hope to represent, really need somebody who's going to be a strong voice on their behalf. But in order to do that, you need to stay engaged and keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the community. And you need to be able to work across party lines and be able to have a cup of coffee with somebody who might have a disagreeing opinion than you have, so that we can learn from each other to make true progress for the things that are important to us and for our shared values across the board. So I think that I want to keep that hands-on approach and keep meeting with people in coffee shops and keep the boots on the ground approach. But again, if anybody's watching at home, my cell phone number is 978-390-0408. I encourage you to contact me. My email is diana@dianadizoglio.com if you prefer email, and I'm happy to answer any and all questions that you have for me.
Thank you, Diana. And I just to add, I think it's really impressive that you know just about everybody here. And this is about as diverse a table as you possibly could get. So I think that speaks well. Somebody has a question.
I think we all know each other as well. Diana, I was concerned hearing the opening statements that nobody mentioned the absolute tragic fact that we have over 1,000 residents living without heat and hot water and without gas. And I know that you've been working to get some of those services to people. I'm anxious to see this move to the next step. And I am wondering if you have any insight into whether legal action is going to be pursued. In my view, it's pretty clear that something criminal happened. And we can't forget how difficult it is for those young mothers who are trying to get kids to school, who are living in hotels in Revere. I mean, it is the most pressing issue, and everything else we talked about tonight, with the exception of maybe the opioid crisis, pales in comparison to what people in our community are going through. So could you tell me about the next steps?
Yes, thank you. It's a great question, actually, because I think that what we're all doing, all of the legislators and all of the local officials, is we're all trying to make sure that we're in constant communication regarding what those next steps are and what we can do in our capacity as elected officials. Regarding talking about legal action, I certainly hope legal action will be taken for some of these families that have been out of their homes that need legal action to be taken. We are not supposed to be involved in that as elected officials, so that's something that, community members would have to participate in themselves. But what we can do as elected officials is we can keep banging the cymbals, and we can keep rallying support for the residents' concerns. Recently, we had the press conference in front of Town Hall. That wasn't for show, that was to get Columbia Gas to pay attention. We had conference calls with the company in which they weren't even participating in. So we had all of these questions that we were raising for the company to answer those questions, only to find that the company didn't even have a representative on the phone with the elected officials to be able to address the residents' concerns, the residents that were contacting our offices. So we've been trying to draw attention to the issue as much as humanly possible, but at the end of the day, Columbia still needs to step it up. They still need to learn how to effectively communicate with the residents across the board. They need to have a greater sense of urgency, and they need to do their job. How we get them to continue to do the job more quickly, we just keep working together. We keep working together. We keep making noise.
Diane, I want to thank you. You've done so much in the community for fighting the opioid crisis, both in the legislature and in the communities. And I want to know what you think, what you see as the next steps, and how the position of senator might better equip you.
I'm sorry,
What the next steps are in fighting the opioid epidemic, as far as your thoughts are, and how being a state senator will help you to do that.
Thank you. So we've made some tremendous progress in a bipartisan approach in the legislature working on combating the opioid epidemic. We've reined in prescriptions for children. We've done the prescription monitoring program. We've increased funds for treatment and recovery. But what we haven't done is we haven't really focused on prevention and education as much as we should. And I was a little disheartened to see that the legislature had initially approved a bill that would send funds directly to our public schools. I'd worked with the North Andover superintendent on a bill that would send money back to the public schools for prevention and education specifically, and that got cut out of the final version of a bill that we had been working on for quite some time. The governor, to his credit, tried to reinstate that funding, and that was not approved at the end of the day. That's something that I think we need to work on moving forward, that we need to make sure that we're funding those prevention and education initiatives, because if you think about it, if somebody doesn't start doing the drug in the first place, they're not going to have the subsequent problem of having an addiction issue later on down the line. I think we really need to focus on that. Another thing, excuse me for 1 second. Another thing that we need to focus on that wasn't implemented was a bill that would allow for people who had overdosed to be treated for 72 hours in a hospital setting. I strongly support that legislation. I can tell you that in talking with our local police chiefs, what's happening is we have people that are overdosing on the streets being taken to the hospital. They're angry because they were taken out of their state of, a high state, and they're getting angry, leaving right away, and then they're doing the drug immediately again as soon as they get out of the hospital to try to get that high again. And what's happening is they're overdosing to the point where they then end up passing away because of it. So I think that we need to do a lot of work on that, on when people do come in for treatment, making sure that they have the adequate treatment they need initially in that hospital setting, and that we're not just sending them back out onto the street. And just, can I follow up with this question right here too? The question about the Columbia Gas explosions. You did say, and I didn't answer the question fully, you did say, what can we do moving forward? And I'm thinking about an elected role. We are talking right now in the legislature about having public hearings on this issue to make sure that everybody that was involved in the Columbia Gas explosions is fully investigated, that they have to come before us in a public hearing. And at the federal level, they have an investigation going on as well right now, and they've been reporting back to us in conference calls very frequently. So we are working on making sure that we have these hearings and bringing everybody to the table so that residents have an opportunity to air their concerns, and so that Columbia Gas has to sit in front of everybody and make sure that they're held accountable for what happened.
Thanks for following up with that. It's very important because as the overseeing body of regulated public utilities, you really do have a role in holding those people accountable.
Exactly.
And I'm just not seeing that, and I'm frustrated and angry, and I'm not throwing that at you. It's just
Right.
Every night we read the paper, we don't know what happened. and people need to go to jail. This is a huge human error that has put a lot of people out of showers. Tom, I don't know, have you showered lately? No offense, I happen to know he lives in the affected zone.
But does anyone have a question for the candidate?
I'm going to follow up. Yes, I have showered.
Can I just, Tom, really quick, do you mind if I just respond to that one more time? I just want to say again, thank you for that. And what's been happening, the reason why you haven't heard about the state legislature taking action right now is because the community members that we've been talking to have actually been asking us not, for the sake of not politicizing the event and for the sake of making sure that all our energy and everybody's energy is on getting people back in their beds safe and warm right now and getting those pipelines fixed, they've actually been talking to us about asking us to hold off on that hearing until everyone's back in their bed and then have the hearing after the fact. So that's what's up for discussion right now, but those discussions are being had, for anybody who's wondering, and feel free to call me anytime about those discussions. And we're getting the bell sounded, but we can continue this.
But our time is up, and thank you so much. Welcome to Alexander Layton Williams, the other candidate for the 1st Essex District State Senate race. You have a question to start?
Alex, thanks for coming out. I was just wondering if you could share your position on Massachusetts becoming a sanctuary state.
So what you mean by that is, do I support at a statewide level voting to create a sanctuary state from Beacon Hill? In general, no. And the reason for that is because as this has been done, it's been at a town-by-town level. And I believe very deeply, and a lot of the core principles of my campaign are about the separation of powers as it was intended by our Constitution. We have granted that power to cities and counties. And me voting for a sanctuary state legislation, voting for or against it, would take that power away from communities that know what they need best. So if it came before me, I would have to abstain from the vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone have another question?
Alex, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you at your young and tender age. I just want to tell you, I have running shoes older than you. But I applaud you for stepping up and doing this. It's a very difficult task. However this comes out for you, I congratulate you, and I hope you move forward with your ambitions, and I hope you continue to do well. I'm going to ask a question that I asked the previous candidate. You're from North Andover.
Oh, no, I'm from Boxford originally. I moved to Amesbury, but I've spent my time in Amesbury for the last 7 years. My father's lived there for that time.
So one of the issues that I think a lot of our candidates have is that when you are from a particular area, the focus happens to be on that area. How do you go about, or how have you been going out, reaching out to the various communities? How have you heard of their concerns? How are you interacting with folks from your entire circle of voters?
Well, I'm a brand new candidate, and so I've had the disadvantage of no one knowing who I am. So for the last year, I've been going around to individual communities and meeting with people, just introducing myself. This has been really wonderful because while I had a sort of base of ideas that I wanted to run on, outside of that, I really wanted to let the people tell me what they wanted. I've been in North Andover and Methuen and Haverhill and Amesbury and Newburyport, all over the district, and I've gotten to hear from a lot of good people, and they've told me what's concerning them. So I'm proud to say that a lot of my platform has been built around the community and by the community. Is that a... Yeah.
You know, I'll just ask
I'm
one
not, I
quick-
feel like I'm
quick
being
follow-up.
angry with you.
No, 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 no.
I'm sorry.
Gosh, no, I think you're doing a great job. Please, and I certainly understand the stress of having to talk in public. So you've heard from many people in the community, and you said that's helped build your platform. What would you say is the #1 issue that you've heard from various constituents?
But I've heard from constituents there's a lot of concern about the opioid crisis, which Governor Baker has taken a tough stance on, and I very much enjoyed Jim Lyons' opening statement, as it's very important to not criminalize it. One of the main things, though, and this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, because it's not something that's very interesting politically, but what needs to happen is a normalization of treatment. Now, what that means really is if someone has an addiction, we need them to be able to receive care without judgment, both from the state, which by not criminalizing it, we achieve that, but also from the community. You need to let people know that if they are going through these treatments, that they haven't committed a great sin. They've made a mistake, and they're trying to rectify it. So while it's on me to make sure that we have resources available, it's on all of us to make sure that these people know that they're still our friends, our family, and our community members.
Yeah, when it comes to the opioids, we hear a lot about treatment, we hear a lot about programs, we hear a lot about, money going into various ways to potentially treat a problem that exists. I know I heard before that there's an attempt to do something about the prescription drugs and try to, attack opioids from that standpoint. But my question is, how much of the opioids are getting here from, let's say, Mexico? What percentage of the opioid problem emanates from out of the country versus, say, pharmaceuticals that kids are able to get hold of? I mean, where do you see the crux of that problem coming from?
It would be pharmaceuticals kids are able to get a hold of. If we would like to track it all the way back to its source, opiates are derived from poppy plants, which are grown primarily in Afghanistan. That doesn't mean Afghanis are sending us opioids. When a doctor prescribes, it's now illegal, thanks to Governor Baker and a number of other legislators, that we now can only give out a 72-hour supply. In some cases, it's shorter. When you are given a large number of opioids, you really don't need that many. And so if they sit on a shelf in your medicine cabinet and someone goes and takes them, they are painkillers. They do make you feel better. That's exactly what they're intended to do. The problem is that feeling is highly, highly addictive. And the chemicals within them bond with receptors in your brain that make them even more addictive. So now you are chemically addicted because of the way they bond with receptors in your brain, and also psychologically addicted in that you really enjoy the way you feel. It's sort of like if you've ever seen a smoker when they start quitting, they'll have lollipops or toothpicks. So now you have those two things working in tandem, and that's very difficult to break. And the longer that addiction lasts, the harder those patterns become to break. So that's why we talk about treatment so much. It can take months or years for someone to become relatively themselves again, that they can break from this pattern of addiction. So that's why you hear it talked about so much. As for it coming from Mexico, perhaps heroin is manufactured there in some way, but you're talking about someone who is in an advanced stage of addiction at that point.
We have about 2 minutes left.
I'm wondering what you see as the major issues or programs that would be helpful for senior citizens.
For senior citizens, it's a lot about community outreach. It's making sure that, this actually, when I was in Boxford on the Board of Assessors, we had to throw in a home rule petition because we had a quasi-retirement living facility. It was a community it was a community of homes that were designed for elderly citizens, but it wasn't a assisted living facility. So they were paying normal taxes on all these properties. And that was a huge drain on the income, the very fixed income of these elderly people. So what my goals would be, and again, this is going to involve a lot of community outreach, would be going in and working out how seniors in a particular town or a particular area see themselves, see their needs, and what they want from me. I'm not a senior citizen. I will be one day, hopefully, but you know, in those respects, I do have to turn to their guidance. I have to know what is best for them and what they see is best for them. Okay.
Does anyone else have a question?
We can just hang out.
I think there's quite a bit of concern in the community about taxes, as you identified, about healthcare generally. There's a lot of food insecurity in areas where you wouldn't necessarily expect there would be. So I encourage you to talk with seniors and to talk with people who work with seniors. It's a good idea.
Oh, absolutely, especially as we do live in a district which has a lot of relatively high income areas, even though it sometimes doesn't feel like it. So what you get is properties that elderly folks are living in that keep going up in value as the towns become more desirable. And so perhaps some sort of abatement for elderly people will become more necessary as time goes on, which I helped institute with the Board of Assessors throughout Boxford as well. My favorite color is red.
What kind of an animal are you considering yourself?
I like tortoises.
It's good to know you like horses, though. I met a big one today.
Oh, yeah?
100 pounds.
Whoa.
I've got a quickie for you.
Sure.
Not about colors, but one of the things that I'm a bit concerned about is that in Massachusetts, we've had a very good run fiscally. One of my concerns is that our rainy day fund, our reserves, are very low. And one of the things I worry about is when we begin to see a turnaround in the economy, though we've done very well, this could be catastrophic for some of the things that we need to think about: education, healthcare, and so on. And I wish you could answer that question.
Yeah.
We're out of time.
Well, I'm sure you can contact him independently.
Absolutely. WilliamStateSenate.org. I answer every question.
All right.
Alex, I'll tell you, I'm very impressed.
Thank you.
You did well.
So you're heading next to the library.
Okay, wonderful.
And now we have Trom Nguyen, candidate for the 18th Essex District for State Representative. Thank you for joining us. Does anyone have a question?
Hi, Trom. Thank you for running. I think we met a few times on the campaign trail.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about the misrepresentation of Jim Lyons' record. I am sensing more and more this personal politics that hits at the most private matters in people's lives, and it seems as though you misstated his record, saying, or that's how it was reported in the paper, saying that he was in favor of criminalizing heroin use. And as you can see, that's That's a really close issue for his family. And I'm wondering if you regret having characterized that, that position of his.
I think that my statement was misinterpreted. So
Misinterpreted by whom?
by saying that I'm saying that he wants to criminalize heroin users. I never said that in the statement. I said that he wanted to criminalize his way out of that, meaning that Jim Lyons has voted against, just this past year, the budget, there's a line item for long-term treatment beds, for example. We need to talk about how this is a public health issue. We need to talk about prevention and long-term treatment. We cannot just concentrate on criminalizing traffickers. That seems to be the only thing that he's pushing forth, while voting against funding for long-term treatment beds. So I think that that statement was misunderstood. I never said anywhere in the article that he's criminalizing heroin addicts or anything. I just said that he wants to criminalize his way out of it, meaning he wanted to just concentrate on criminalizing traffickers only, without talking about the other bills for prevention programs at the middle school level. He's against that. He's against the funding for long-term treatment beds. We know people die waiting for a long-term treatment bed to get into, and these are the things that I care about and that I want to work for.
Are you saying that he's against funding for long-term treatment beds because he voted against the entire budget, or has he?
No, there's a specific line item in there.
And he pulled that out, and he voted specifically against that?
No, there's a specific line item for shelters, for veterans.
How many items are in that line item?
I don't know the specific. I can certainly get back to you, but I have the line item with the funding for long-term treatment beds and other resources for
The way
people
I
suffering
always
from
understood the
opioid.
budget to work was there'd be 5 or 6 consolidated items for the whole $40 million budget.
No. There are several different line items. It's not 4 or 5. There are several different ones. I can show you. Just this past year, just this morning, I was looking through the budget for this past year, and there are roll calls for at least 20 that I looked up personally.
And Jim Lyons voted against long-term treatments after that. What you just told you, you think that he pulled that out and voted against long-term treatment?
Well, I mean, his dad was
Do you have a number?
His dad was a police officer.
That's another person.
I'm sorry?
I'm going to ask that we move on to another question.
I think that we have talked about, I'd like to ask about the senior citizens
Yeah.
and what you think are priorities in the different communities. What programs would be interest to you, and what recommendations you'd have.
Well, as an advocate and attorney for seniors, I'm very much in support of making sure that seniors have the support that they need in order to stay and grow old in the communities where they have been. And I am very much in support of funding for the Council on Aging, funding for Meals on Wheels. And when we're talking about records, these, again, are line items where Representative Lyons has voted against funding for seniors. And I want to make sure that people are aware that our budget affects our daily lives very much so, and with a representative in place who has voted against our budget about 2-3 years in a row already, we are getting the bare minimum from the state. He's not getting an additional funding for senior centers, and I can assure you that that's something I would work towards making sure that happens.
Yes. What is your view on Massachusetts spending $2 billion a year on illegals instead of legal citizens? Sanctuary cities and Massachusetts as a sanctuary state as a magnet for illegals, eliminating ICE, compromising citizen safety, which would also encourage MS-13, as well as drug trafficking, human trafficking, and all kinds of crime. So my question is, could we not be spending $2 billion a year better on citizens, local aid back to the district? Why isn't that happening? And that's always something that I have not been able to understand, why we cry for money, yet we spend money on people that are here illegally.
Okay, so that seems to be a multi-part question. In terms of sanctuary cities, that's at the city and town level. They decide that, so the state representative would not have much say in that. In terms of sanctuary state, I would need to understand more of what your understanding of that is, because very even like-minded people disagree on what a sanctuary state is. For me, I personally support making sure that we use local police resources wisely and not have us use local police resources to carry out the bidding of the federal government, because that's unconstitutional as against the 10th Amendment. And in terms of the number of the $2 billion, I'm not sure where you got that from, but but for me, I know as an advocate and someone who works in both housing and public benefits, et cetera, I know for a fact that people who are not documented do not get access to these programs, because I work with these agencies very closely, and those are all in the regulations.
They're able to get social security numbers. They're able to, there's no e-verify here, so that so companies can verify if somebody is illegal, if somebody is legally able to work here or not. So my question again becomes, if we're not taking safeguards,
If
what are we going to do?
If I may ask, can we focus on issues that are local to our district and our state?
Yeah.
Since this is,
Well, that would be to our state.
Well, to answer your question, I do believe that we need to verify, and that's why the I-9 is for, to make sure that people have the authorization to work, and I am very much in support of that as an officer of the law. I want people to follow the law.
Trom, I'd like to speak as an immigrant, and I think I represent everybody at this table. We all came here at some point. But what I'm really interested in is the heart and soul of what Massachusetts is all about and what our country is all about. And we've always been a very inclusive community. We've been on the forefront in many of those regards. We have a question on the ballot, question 3, that I find it hard to believe that we actually have to have question 3 on the ballot.
Right.
Could you give us a little bit of your feeling on, I suspect you're a supporter of it. Could you speak to that a little bit?
I am absolutely a yes on question 3. This is about human dignity and the right to be free from discrimination. We are, like you said, the leader in terms of making sure that we pass marriage equality. We're the first to do that, and I want us to remain, us meaning the Commonwealth, to remain a leader in making sure that everyone's treated fairly and equally, and that everyone has the right to not be treated as second-class citizens. And I'm quite astounded that the current state representative was the lead co-sponsor to try to get rid of the anti-discrimination protection that so many people, transgender folks, depend on, so that they can be in public spaces free of discrimination and not be targeted for who they are.
Why is
Sean, you've been a successful legal aid attorney. Why are you running for state office? Why change?
I have been a legal aid attorney my entire career, and in addition to serving and representing clients in the courtroom, including seniors, veterans, people with disability, and more, I've also done legislative advocacy. So I've worked on several bills like paid family medical leave, earned income tax credit, and other bills to support working families. And for 2 years now, I tried to meet with the current state representative to talk to him about these bills. My office is literally down the street from the State House, so I go there very regularly to either testify on bills or give legal advice on different aspects of bills, and we work in a coalition to push these bills forward, and I never got a response from him. And so for me, I think a state representative, in order to be an effective one, you need to meet with your constituents, you need to hear them, hear about the issues that they care about, and as an advocate, that's literally my job. When someone shows up at my doors, I don't ask, where do you stand on XY issue? It's more of, let's sit down, what are your problems, how can I work with you, how can we find real solutions, and that's what I'm looking to do. And as someone who has been a constituent here for several years now, I'm very much concerned about our representation at the State House because we have someone who hasn't passed one single bill in the 8 years in office. And for me, I've worked on bills that have been signed into law and know what it takes to work with people from across the aisle, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, to make sure that we're coming to a compromise that can move things forward. And that was how we were able to pass paid family medical leave. That was how I was able to get the domestic violence provision into the earned income tax credit bill to make sure that people suffering from domestic violence and who have been abandoned by their spouses can get access to earned income tax credit to move on with their lives. And I want to be able to continue to do that, to serve every single person in our community and make sure that it's a welcoming place for everyone. And as someone in my 30s, I care about this community. I moved back here to start a family, so I want to make sure that we have the resources that we need, and that's why I'm running.
One other question. When you mentioned the bathrooms and gender, and my question is this.
I didn't mention bathrooms.
Well, is that question 3?
Oh, it's public accommodation, so it's all public spaces,
Oh, okay.
including the Stevens Estate,
Why
et cetera.
is gender a social construct and not a biological construct?
I'm not a doctor, so I don't know.
Social construct is you wake up in the morning and you feel you're a male or a female, but biological, it goes by chromosomes.
Is
You
there a
have an X
question?
or a Y. A male has a Y chromosome. So I don't understand why gender is in your mind, whereas it's not biological.
I don't know if there's a question there, and I don't know how to answer that. I'm sorry.
Well, that's why I don't understand why there's even a...
Our time is over, sir.
Hello, Mr. Lyons, and
Yes.
thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
This is the other candidate for the 18th Essex District for State Representative. Does anyone have a question?
I do. I'm glad that you came tonight. Thank you for coming.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I'm concerned about question 3 and that you've co-sponsored question 3. And I want you to help me understand why you would want to take civil rights away from your constituents. And don't you like transgender people? I don't get it.
Well, I mean, the basic foundation of your question is unfortunately wrong. And to suggest that I don't like people or don't have respect for all human beings is fundamentally flawed. This legislation has nothing to do with discrimination. And that is how the proponents of the bill have tried to frame the argument. This bill has to do with changing society. The discrimination laws have been on the books in Massachusetts regarding transgender people for 25 years. So to suggest that this law is necessary to protect transgender folks from discrimination is simply untrue. I brought this to the attention of the Attorney General. There's a case law that went all the way up to the Supreme Court on a person that was working at a convenience store out in Hudson 25 years ago. So as it relates to the issue of discrimination, you have to take that off the table. So now you come back to what the bill actually does. The bill has actually got to do with gender identity. There are 3 fundamental flaws that I have with the bill. Number 1, an individual can decide on any given day what their gender is. So let's take an example that we're familiar with because it's going on in Concord, Massachusetts right now. A 14, 15-year-old male decides that that particular day that they are a female. And that person decides to go into the girls' locker room after practice to shower. To me, that's wrong. We should not be having that kind of behavior in the high schools. But yet that's what this bill allows. And if a young woman who happens to be in that shower facility complains, the law is written that that person, the young woman, needs to go to counseling. That's number one. Number two, if you are at a restaurant, McDonald's, Dunkin' Donuts, and you're with your young child, and your young child goes into the boys' room or the ladies' room or whatever bathroom they go into, and you see, let's just say it was a person that looks like a man walking into the ladies' room after your grandchild or your daughter goes in there, and you approach and say, look, I want you to wait until that child comes out. You are subject to arrest, jail time, and fines. That makes no sense to me. And finally, how many of you folks know 5-year-olds? Everyone have a 5-year-old? You familiar with 5-year-olds? 3-year? So at 5 years old, the law says that a 5-year-old is capable of deciding their gender identity. All three of those scenarios that I just explained to you is part of the law. I think those are not the way that we ought to be going. So when it relates to discrimination, I have folks who've come into my office who are transgender folks. And I have made it perfectly clear, and I'll make it perfectly clear to you tonight and to everybody who's watching. No one has a right to discriminate against anyone ever. And I've given them my card and my cell phone number, and I have told them, if you believe that you are ever discriminated against, you call me, and I will be the first one to stand shoulder to shoulder to protect your civil rights. That is not what America is about, and that is not what I'm about. And my opponents want to call me all kinds of names, and they are simply wrong.
Well, I think that's very interesting comments too. So how are you suggesting people should vote on question 3 then?
I think if you heard what I said, I clearly think people should vote to overturn the law, which is a no vote.
Yeah, this is when it gets into how things are phrased.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Okay, I would like to ask what I asked other people, because I think that it really is concerning to me when things get discussed in terms of the bathroom law or things like that. I think that's an emotional issue that really doesn't do justice to the people who are struggling with transgender issues. And that was not a question. My question is, what do you see as the important issues regarding seniors in the communities? And just to put in a notice that people really do appreciate when you return phone calls to seniors.
Well, thank you. I try to return all my phone calls, whether it be to seniors or others. I think one of the biggest issues, for example, that just the other day I had a phone call from one of my constituents whose mother and his elderly mother and sister were living in an apartment building, and they were being harassed. And I stepped in and directed them to Elder Affairs and tried to help them through it. I think making sure that our seniors are protected is very, very important to me. But also, one of the other things that we're trying to do in Massachusetts is to allow that the tax burden isn't as significant for the seniors. And we've worked on legislation that would ease those taxes and making sure that they can stay in their homes and live on their own. So I think the organizations that we have, Elder Affairs, does a great job, helping seniors. And I think it's critically important that we provide those kind of services to our elders.
I'd like to thank you for your bravery in sharing your story about your son and the opioid crisis. I think putting a human face on that crisis is incredibly important, and I respect you and Bernadette tremendously for putting that out on the table. Earlier, we talked a little bit about the opioid crisis with your opponent, and she mentioned that she would work across the aisle to bring funds to that. And I didn't have an opportunity to say, but you did talk about your work with Brian Dempsey. Could you elaborate on the work that you and Brian did in a bipartisan way to make things better for addicts and their families?
Yeah, that happened to be, one of the things. I historically will cajole my Democratic colleagues. Sometimes it even aggravates them a little bit. But as far as this opiate epidemic, Brian and I met at the back of the chamber, and I was going to speak to the amendment, and he said, Jimmy, we just can't have the money. We don't have the money. He said, I don't think we can get it done. I said, all I ask you, Brian, is sit down and listen. I went and sat down with Brian. I said, this is my kid. This is my son. And I said, let's go to the Gavin Foundation. You've got to come. Have you ever been to one of these places? And he hadn't. And it was a Saturday morning. It was a rainy day. And Tyler, my son that I talked about today, we walked in, and Dempsey's sitting in the corner, and Liz Mallieu was there, chairman of the mental health, and Denise Garlick was there. And Brian walks up, and, Tyler knew all the people that were there, and they were all giving Tyler a hug. Now, remember, Tyler's got thrown out of there because he violated their policies. He's got thrown out of a lot of places. But anyhow, Dempsey looks at him and he goes, hey, Tyler, I got to ask you a real serious question. How bad is it to live in a Republican household? Dempsey and I went to watch a presentation by 3 young women, and they were in recovery. And Brian was sitting right beside me. And he leaned over, and he was looking at the 3 22-year-old, 23-year-old young women. And he said, Jimmy, that could be my daughter. And what happens is you kind of lose yourself in the moment. And he forgot that Brian, Tyler is my son. And working with these guys, because this isn't a Democratic issue. This isn't a Republican issue. This is an issue we all have to deal with.
For the people who are watching, Brian Dempsey was at the time the Democrat chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, the person with the most authority over writing the budget for
Exactly.
the entire state.
And he put the money. He called me in July and put the money in.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And your next table will be in the library. Thank you for joining us.
Sure,
This is
thanks for
Ryan
having me.
Losco. Sorry, I have to introduce you.
Sure, yeah, no worries.
Because
Thank
we're
you.
on camera this time.
All right, perfect.
So this is Ryan Losco. He's running for the 14th Essex District for state representative.
That's right.
Does anyone have a question?
Please.
Ryan, first of all, thank you very much for running. It's, at your young and tender age, it's a difficult thing to face all of these old curmudgeons and answer these questions, but appreciate it, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you for that.
So one of the things that I've asked a number of the candidates is that you're a North Andover, right?
Yes.
Right? And as am I.
Good.
So I'm very excited that we have two North Andover candidates,
Yeah.
candidates running, because I think that's good for us. Tell me how you have interacted with Lawrence and Methuen and Haverhill. They're all four very, very different communities.
Yeah.
Your experiences in the past and what you've done to reach out to those communities.
Sure, that's a great question. Thank you for that. So, first, so before the campaign, I was active in the community. I was a hockey referee, hockey coach, and I still do that now. I worked at the Merrimack Valley YMCA at their specifically Camp Otter. So very much in high school, I was working in the community. I was a bus monitor. We would, pick the counselors up in Lawrence and Methuen, and so I had interactions in the community at that age. Coming back to it now, that was in high school. Coming back to it now in the campaign role, I've knocked over 6,000 doors so far in all the communities. The biggest thing for me is going door to door and meeting everybody, or as close to everybody as I can. Unfortunately, the campaign period's a little short, but
You're one of the few people who think that.
yeah. Well, I like to talk, so door knocking's not too bad. But just doing that and going out into those communities. Obviously, I'm from town. I love this town, but really the door to door effort is where I've been, interacting in those other communities.
What issues are you finding, maybe the top two issues when you knock on doors that people are concerned about?
Sure. Well, right now, I think the number one issue is with the gas explosions going on, is Columbia Gas, and how we're going to handle that. The deadline to have everything done is, I think it's a week or two after the election. So really, hit the ground running on that issue. Secondary to that, I think it differs from the communities that you're in, I think, but definitely, the opioid epidemic going on is a huge issue. Folks with, taxing and spending, government spending, and actually, I just thought of it now. Transparency within government has been a reoccurring thing, and accountability with our elected officials and, our judges and things like that. So I would say that it's kind of a combination of all of those things. I know that everything has a lot of moving parts, it's fluid, but I would say definitely the accountability and transparency part of it definitely is high up on the ladder.
I have a question.
Sure. Oh, I like this. We're going back and forth. The other tables, they were going like around in a circle. It's getting dizzy.
I just want to ask about education. So the district spans some broad economic levels and educational achievement.
Sure.
And I'm wondering, how can we lift each other up?
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that in terms of education?
Sure. So I am I'm a graduate of our public schools in town. I then went to public higher education at Westfield State. So I think that our public schools do a good job. We need to support them and all across the board. Working together with colleagues in the legislature to make sure that our schools have the proper resources to educate our students, and focusing on all different types of education. So I went the route where high school and then college. I have a 13-year-old brother who I tell go into a trade because you don't want this debt, man. I'm telling you, with the student loans. So I think coming at it or front where there's a whole wide array of education is not maybe the traditional route. Would be some of the things I'm looking at.
Just real quick.
Sure.
I guess I was thinking a little bit about the academic achievement in Lawrence versus North Andover, for example, where there's different, because there's different tax base, there's different different educational opportunities, AP classes and
Okay, yeah,
things
sure.
like that.
I think in this, I mean, I don't have, I don't have a bill or something in front of me. I think, you know, we would have to, the state rep would have to look at it, you know, on what the needs are on a case-by-case basis, and, you know, make proper, you know, determination of what, where the need is within the district. So that would be the thing I would look at as far as, you know, where we go there, in that issue. Thank you.
We've talked a bit about immigration issues, and to simplify it, are you in favor of any of the proposals that would allow cities, towns, states to ignore federal immigration law in dealing with people who commit crimes within their communities?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. I think I'm the only candidate to come out who said that they oppose a sanctuary state, you know, bill. I think, to me, your tax dollars fund federal law enforcement officers, and for the state government to say, no, 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 we don't want to work with you, I think is kind of a disservice, because you're paying for those services, and you know, they do a good job at keeping us safe, and I think that we need to empower our law enforcement officers to work together to keep our community safe.
I'll ask the question that I've asked everybody, just
Sure.
about everybody else. What do you see as the priorities for seniors, or primary concerns or particular
Yeah.
programs that you would support?
Sure. So, in my recent experience working in the DA's office, I focused very much on elder abuse cases, and I think that the state doesn't do a good enough job at educating on the types of abuses that are out there and the types of support services that are out there, really expanding those. I worked with a lot of great organizations while I was in the DA's office, senior support services, and I think really expanding upon those, because it's kind of an issue that nobody really talks about, but it's a pretty serious issue, and it does happen, and it's really unfortunate. So I would be focusing, kind of taking my victim advocate hat with me to Beacon Hill, and focusing more on that kind of issue.
If elected, what do you think, what would your signature issue be? What would your focus, what would you be working towards getting passed right out of the gate?
Signature issue. Well, like I said earlier, right now, the signature issue, I think, whether you want it to be or not, is the Columbia gas going on right now. Making sure that, you know, they follow through on the promises that they made, making sure that that deadline is kept, and if not, you know, making sure that they're not forgetting about their customers in the affected area, and just being a loud voice advocate for those folks. I was a loud voice advocate in the courtroom, and I plan on doing that on Beacon Hill.
Ryan, how do you feel about our current situation with reserves in our state?
What do you mean by that? How do I feel about us having money, or?
Yeah, you probably think it's a good idea for us to.
Yeah, money's good.
Money's good.
Yeah.
So, do you have any concerns? I'm beginning to hear some concerns about the level of reserves that we have and the ability to increase the contributions into our reserves.
So the concerns are that you think we need more in our reserves or less?
Well, at least from my perspective, a reserve is like an emergency fund
Right.
in your own home.
Yeah.
So the reserves are for us to take care of those shock things that may happen.
Yeah.
If the economy tanks, if we begin having issues with that, our tax collections are not where we think they ought to be. Being able to continue to pay for all of the programs that we statutorily have to may become an issue. So having adequate reserves, and I guess the other part of that is there's always that problem of we want to be able to fund programs.
Yeah.
We want to be able to keep our taxes low, and sometimes you can't spend and not tax at the same time.
Right.
So I
And
guess.
right. I think that comes down to, what I've said before is, you know, I'm a candidate who is running on common sense, fiscally conservative government. You know, I just told this story at the last, I grew up in a household where if, you know, we didn't if I didn't have, the money to pay for something I wanted, I either cut it or I worked hard to get it. I think, the reserves, like you were saying, are important for us in case we do have a rainy day fund. We definitely need that. And that's something that we're definitely going to need to make sure that we, fulfill that on Beacon Hill. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Your next table is in the library. Go out here and take a look.
Beautiful. All right. Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thank you.
And thank you for being with us, Christina. This is Christina Minicucci. She is running for state rep in the 14th Essex District. Does anyone have a question for her?
Sure.
Thank you. You're right there when I need you.
I'm your right-hand man. Yes. Christina, thank you for being here. We very much appreciate it, and the fact that you took on the mantle of being a candidate. I understand how difficult that is, and what a drain it is on energy and resources, and you may have to get reintroduced to your family.
Yeah.
So I have two-part question, one that I've asked everybody, and that is that as a North Andoverite, I'm delighted we have two people running that are from North Andover. Yeah. That's great for our community, but it's also very important to have ties to the other communities and to have some roots in all of those communities, and perhaps you could speak to that. And the other piece that I often hear is we need a business person, somebody with some good business sense. And so if you could just touch upon those things, that would be great.
Sure. Well, I was born in Lawrence on Knox Street, which is in the district. I've knocked on the door 3 times now, so I have gone home. My great-grandparents lived there until they died, so I used to visit it quite often. And my grandfather started his first business on the corner of Jackson and Swan Street, also in the district. I have also visited Corbani's, which is right across the street, because the old gas station isn't there anymore, but Corbani's is still there. But I have spent most of my life living here in the Merrimack Valley. I grew up in North Andover. I have traveled to other places, lived in other places in between, but for the bulk of my life, I've lived right here in the 14th Essex District. My family has a family business here. I've worked there for some years, as well as I currently work with my husband, also here in the 14th Essex District. And our business has always been throughout all 4 of the communities that are the 14th Essex. Boy, I said that a lot of times. The other question was, as far as my business experience, so I was a Spanish major in college, so that's one of those things, you go to college, I can speak Spanish really well, but it didn't really come out with a lot of good experience, and so I went into the business world as a project manager in translation first, as well as in the music industry, and then I went back to school and got my MBA, where I really honed my business skills. I always had a propensity for numbers, so numbers were always my thing, but I just really had never focused on that in school. And most of my business experience is project management, which I think actually perfectly suits me for this job, because I have to follow a budget, I have to make sure I hold the line, I have to sit in a room full of people who don't agree, who all think that their opinion is right, and listen to them and listen to all the stakeholders and come to a solution that everybody can agree on. And sometimes it's not the solution that I want. It might not be exactly the thing that I'm looking for, but at the end of the day, I have to come help everybody get to a solution so we can move forward. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
A bit, but I'd like to follow up.
Sure.
The family business is high-density residential development, and the business you run with your husband, what is that business?
We have investors, and we help them invest in real estate assets, typically not in the Merrimack Valley, typically in other places. So it's really an investment vehicle that he's the investor. I help out with investor relations. But as far
I'm
as
still not sure I understand.
So we have people who want to invest in real estate. We use our real estate experience to help them find stabilized assets, as well as maybe raw land that they want to develop, or perhaps just to hold for a long time as part of their portfolio. So these are people who, instead of investing in the stock market, want to invest in real estate, and we help them invest. So really, we're advisors. As far as my family business, we don't just do high-density development. Minco has been in the Merrimack Valley for 35 years. We have a commercial real estate arm, and we used to have a residential real estate arm. We do leasing and sales, which is really a lot of what we do. And we do some development. We'll do development of all kinds. So some is residential and some is commercial. So we've done real estate development.
If we want to ask some less personal questions.
I don't think her business experience is personal.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that question.
I was just trying to aim.
I was not trying to.
Oh, I didn't feel like it was an attack at all. No, that was
Okay,
just,
good.
that was fact-finding.
Okay, well, I don't think this is a personal one either. What do you see as what I've been asking other people as the priorities for seniors in the communities, and what kind of programs would you suggest? I guess affordable housing would come into some of this too.
Yes.
Yes.
Affordable housing, or housing in general, is my wheelhouse. I mean, that is what my family business is, so I know a lot about it. I did a one-year program at Harvard specifically on housing. I have written a workforce housing plan for the city of Fort Lauderdale that they used as a pilot. So housing that is affordable to people actually really is important to me. And one of the things that I find the biggest struggle for seniors, as well as for young people, so people at either end of the spectrum, is you're right, finding a place that's affordable, but not just finding a place that's affordable, but some place that's actually safe and affordable, so that, meets standards. In running for office, as well as prior to that, I have traveled to the different senior centers and talked to people, and it seems like for most people, their biggest concern is making sure that our senior centers are places right now that aren't very inviting. And they say, well, we want a place where we can be active. So I think kind of continuing that push to make sure there's active programming for seniors is really important. Meals on Wheels is great, but it's not the healthiest option for people, and sometimes it's the only food that people are getting, and it's the only wellness check that people get. So I think making sure that we do a better job checking in on our seniors, making sure our seniors actually have someone that are looking out for them every day, which I'm not entirely sure has happened. North Andover, prior to my dad starting his business, he was the executive director of the Housing Authority, and any housing that has been built in the recent past, which isn't so recent anymore, was built while he was executive director. That was a long time ago. He hasn't been executive director since the 80s. So we need to do a better job maybe updating what we have for housing availability for seniors in the community. So.
One of the real, I think, controversial issues in state government over the past year has been the bill, I think, which opponents will call it the Sanctuary State Bill, proponents will call it the Safe Communities Act. Either way, it's going to prevent ICE agents from cooperating with local law enforcement officials. Where do you stand on that?
Well, the Safe Communities Act does not prevent ICE agents from cooperating with.
Prohibits.
What it will do is it will not force us to use our local tax dollars, to use our local resources to do the bidding of ICE. We're not going to be deputized by ICE, our police officers.
But it prevents communities that want to cooperate with ICE from cooperating with ICE. It would do that.
I guess that,
Also-
I guess that my question is, I know as a resident of North Andover, I don't want to use my tax dollars to cooperate with ICE. I want my police officers to be working to help the residents of my community be safe. I want them, if you go into Lawrence especially, the number of officers that they have on the street compared to the number of officers Worcester has on the street is significantly less, and they have more calls than almost every other community in the Commonwealth. If the Lawrence police officers have to spend time going and breaking up homes and breaking up families because ICE wants them to do that job, they're not doing their job, which is keeping the streets of Lawrence safe, which is taking the drug dealers off the street, which is one of the #1 concerns of all these tables that I've been around, is how do we keep drugs off the street? We gotta make sure our police officers are doing that. And our police officers are accessible to all of everybody living in our community. Nobody should be afraid to contact the police because of their immigration status. And that's the thing that I'm concerned with most. Yeah.
So my follow-up to that is the recent large fentanyl bust in Lawrence, the second one, huge fentanyl ring. I really like our local law enforcement working with ICE, because those guys who are at the center of that ring, who are not here legally, I don't want to spend one penny trying them. I just want them deported.
Right. But if you break laws, you are going to be prosecuted for the laws in which you break.
But
I have no problem prosecuting anybody, regardless of whether or not they're documented, undocumented, or otherwise. If you are breaking laws, you need to be tried,
the
period.
sanctuary state legislation gives local law enforcement one less tool to use against these guys who are ruining the quality of life in Lawrence.
Well, I mean, I see where you're coming from. I don't believe that my understanding of the Safe Communities Act is not that they cannot cooperate with ICE. It is just that they are not forced to cooperate with ICE. I really am, everybody I talk to worries about tax dollars. I don't want my taxes to go up. That is the #1 thing everybody says. But then we want to use our local tax dollars to do the work of federal agents. And that's what I don't understand. Why aren't federal agencies paying for the work that they want to be doing on the ground? Why should it be us?
Just because you're running for state representative doesn't mean that we don't pay federal tax dollars. It sounds like what you're advocating for is just robbing Peter to pay Paul.
No, not necessarily. My point is, I don't believe that we need to be going around breaking up families. I truly believe that we do not need to break up families. People who are undocumented, who have been living in our community for 20, 30 years. My family's an immigrant family. There are plenty of people, and if you go through this entire place where we've been sitting here tonight, who can tell their own immigrant stories about coming here, and everyone says, oh, well, I came here legally, but when my family came here, there wasn't an issue of coming here legally. Everybody just came here. So I guess in my mind, I think that people are here, they're productive members of the community. I don't think we need to be using anybody's tax dollars anywhere and hunting those people down. But if ICE wants to do it, I think that, or the federal government wants to do it, then it should be federal tax dollars, not local tax dollars.
Diana's focus has been on, I think, education and addiction. And I wondered if you have a sense of where your focus would be if you were to be a representative.
Well, definitely education is a focus for me. That's the #1 reason why I decided to run for state rep. I have 3 kids in this public school system. I have a lot of skin in the game. It's really important to me to ensure that, that our town is getting the money from the state, that we're getting the local aid that we need to fund those unfunded mandates that people talk about. We haven't looked at that formula since 1993, so our town is not getting reimbursed from the state in order to meet the needs of the students within our community. So I think it's time to look at that so we can free up our local tax dollars to spend on other things, so that we're not backfilling the difference, to make sure we have a quality education for students.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
everyone.
much for joining us, and thank you to everyone at this table for joining us on NACAM. Thank you to everyone watching at home and who will watch the YouTube video later. This has been a really wonderful candidating evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, have a great night.